Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrived from the Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is a Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you didn't know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said, "if you have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the men who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one of whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead," she added. "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finished harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the womb of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Maybe just for those who weren't here yesterday, we were looking just in the beginning of Ruth, how Naomi arrives into the story bitter because the Lord's hand is against her, turned against her. And what we're going to see in the chapters of Ruth is how she begins to see God's kindness and it turns her to sweet. So her name is sweet, pleasant. Naomi is what it means. But in the first chapter, she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter, call me Mara." Let's have a look at Ruth chapter 2. Which one of these is best? A life raft, a bulletproof car, or a vaccine? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to turn to the person next to you and decide which one you want.
Just do you say it? Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm not going to give you long. So a life raft, a bulletproof car, or a vaccine? Which one is best? Well, I'm guessing as you chatted, you were asking the question, best for what? Well, to give you protection, to give you refuge. But, well, it depends then. Is my issue that I'm shipwrecked, I've been shot at, or I'm in the middle of a pandemic? Where is the best place to look for protection and refuge, not just for one thing, but for everything? Not just for a life problem, but for all of life. If we're honest, we put our trust in all sorts of places to make us feel safe. I wonder what it is for you. Is it the bank balance? Is it the family? Is it reputation? Health? Or obviously for me, looks? Thanks. Ruth chapter 2 is about where to look, where to seek refuge. And what happens if you seek refuge in God? Now, maybe you think, I'm happy to trust God for the big stuff, or, forgiveness and heaven and eternity, but not for everything. Like, I have to do the small stuff on my own. In Ruth chapter 2, as we join Naomi and Ruth, do you remember as they were on the road, now they arrive into Bethlehem, and they're widows. They have nothing. We've seen that Naomi is just asking the question, is God kind? She knows he's real, but she's bitter because of how God has treated her. Do you remember chapter 1, verse 20? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Well, Naomi's in for a bit of a surprise, and maybe so are we. Do you remember that the big question is, as we look at Ruth, is God kind? And we see there's two stories going on here. The obvious story, kindness in the detail, as God works in the lives of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. But then there's a bigger story of the provision of a deliverer, kindness in a deliverer that is not just for Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, but for the whole world. This talk this morning, we're going to look, if you like, at the detail, so the more obvious story mostly, God's providential kindness. The fact that God is in control, not just of the big things, but of everything. In the book, God actually, he doesn't intervene directly anywhere. Doesn't speak directly anywhere. I was having a good conversation over breakfast with someone about this, and actually it's quite helpful for us. The normal Christian reality is, well, God speaks through his word and works in the circumstances on our lives. So we're folk who don't hear a direct voice from God or have sort of direct miraculous intervention every day of our lives. Well, let's have a look. 3 scenes we're going to look at in Ruth chapter 2, and then application. Here's the first scene. In the kitchen, verses 1 and 2, questioning God's kindness. Now, I say in the kitchen, I guess what I'm imagining is here's Naomi and Ruth, they're in Bethlehem now, This is morning time, we're going to see in a moment. So I'm guessing this conversation is happening over breakfast in the kitchen. So here's the kitchen. You can see I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I don't know what should be in the kitchen, but I want you to imagine this is the kitchen. And remember what's happening as Naomi and Ruth sit around the kitchen table. They've come empty. Do you remember in that culture, no equal opportunities for Ruth, no social security, no widow's pension for Naomi. Without a husband, without a father, no income, no place in society, no security. And the questions running around Naomi's head are, well, is God kind? And what about Ruth? As she sits there with Naomi, is it right for her to trust in Naomi's God? Is there really refuge there? Because actually at this moment for them, it's so hard to see what God is up to. And maybe that's us. You know, we want to trust God, but it's so hard when we just can't see what he is up to. Now, Naomi maybe expects nothing, but Ruth takes action. Look at verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Yes, there's no welfare system, but Ruth knows God and his ways. She knows about gleaning. And here's the first sign, if you like, of God's providential kindness. A law. We find it in Deuteronomy 24. That because God is a God who cares for the foreigner, for the fatherless, for the widow, we're told, he wants his people who are to reflect him to care for them too. And so when they're out harvesting, they're not to pick up every last scrap that gets left behind, but they're to leave it for the foreigner and for the widow. I wonder whether this is your sense. In society today, I think when people hear about sort of God and God's law and the Bible, they sort of think, oh, it's just all oppressive and narrow-minded. You know, it does take a lot of wisdom for us to work out how some of the Old Testament law applies, but here's a law that is just so clear, shows what God is like, and shows that his ways are the best, therefore are good. So, Ruth gets up. As she goes to glean, do you remember what the time is? We saw this yesterday. It's the time of the judges. A dark time where people had rejected God. There was increasing violence and evil. And do you remember, she is a foreigner from the enemy land, the Moabite. What are the chances of her as she leaves the home in Bethlehem to go out to the fields, to find a field where she's going to be safe? Well, Ruth, in faith and in love for Naomi, goes. I think this activity of Ruth actually teaches us a bit about faith. There's no excuse for laziness as a Christian, for doing nothing. Real faith actually leads to action. So we cry out to God, help me in my exams. But then we also need to do some study. Or we say, I really want to tell this friend about Jesus. But then we also need to look for opportunities. Or we cry out to God, please help me to be good. We also need to try and fight sin. Or God, guide me here. Help me to know what is your will. At the end of the day, it might be that we need to look at his word and the situation that we're in and just make a decision. Well, Naomi says, yes, Ruth, go. And Ruth goes. In the kitchen, scene 2, in the field, experiencing God's kindness. I love this. Verse 3, just look at this. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech, Naomi's late husband, as it turned out. Isn't it brilliant? You know, the one field she wanders into, whose field is it? It's Elimelech's, a relative. You get at the end of chapter 1 as well, as they arrive back into Bethlehem hungry. Oh, it just turns out it's the barley harvest time. Just so happens. What a stroke of luck. Luck? There's no such thing. The Irish, we love to talk about luck the whole time. Our usual greeting is, good luck as you say goodbye to someone. This world isn't a world of fate and impersonal forces or chance. It is under the sovereign control of God. And actually, that's why verse 1 comes before verse 2. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. You see, as Ruth went, and she didn't know what God was up to, well, God knows. God does. For us as Christians, when we experience blessings, it's not, oh, what a coincidence. It's what an amazing God. Here is a God who is not just God of sort of our private life or a religious world, but a God where his kindness is seen everywhere. In the field, in the office, in the playground, in the kitchen sink, in the details of life, and in Boaz's field. As Ruth goes into the field, we now know it's Boaz's field, but what is Boaz like? We know he's rich, he's a relative, but is he kind? No guarantees. Well, verse 4. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. He's godly. Not just in church, but in life. It affects the workplace. He's a good employer. He's got good employees. That's why, actually, when he says, verse 5, who's this woman that's in the field with you? Well, we find verse 7 that she'd asked whether she could glean among them, and they've let her. Good employees. From a good employer, because Boaz knows God, who is a God of kindness. And so he's kind. So verse 8, Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field. Don't go away from me. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. Boaz gives this foreigner permission to glean and protection as she does. And Ruth, well, she can't believe it. This is just not normal, verse 10. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? So this is a lovely interaction. She knows that as a Moabite, well, this is not what she should expect. She's bowled over, amazed by Boaz's grace to her. What about us? Last Sunday, I was in a crowd of about 30,000 supporting the Irish women's rugby team. And before it started, the whole stadium was told to keep a moment of silence to remember the Irish famine, which happened in the 1800s. And the Irish famine, over 1 million people died over a space of about five or 6 years, and another 1 million emigrated. And as I stood there in the stadium, as we were silent, I looked around and I thought, I wonder what those folk in the middle of the famine would have made of us in this rugby stadium, in our comfort and our leisure, with the food on the table. I think today we expect life to be good. We think everything should go well. We expect a quality education. We expect 90 years of health. We expect never to suffer injustice or mistreatment. And if we don't get that, well, we are discontent. I think for me, sometimes I just have not realized that I deserve so little. As someone who's lived in God's world, at times completely on my own agenda, as we at times have hearts that follow our own desires so often, and actually so often don't show kindness, and yet we expect kindness from God. What we deserve actually is for him to reject us, punish us, not to give us life and hope. So actually we should be amazed when we experience any kindness from God's hands. Well, Ruth has got even more kindness to come, more kindness through Boaz. It's just way beyond what is required. Lavish care. So at lunchtime, Boaz says to Ruth, come sit at my table. And then he gives her so much food that she can't even finish it all. She's got leftovers. And then he lets her glean in the field, and he says to the man, you know, that one gleaning over there, don't pick up every scrap. Make sure, even just throw a bit of extra out for her to pick up. And Ruth, verse 10, goes, why? Why have you done this? And, well, he says, well, I've been told about you. Well, what's Boaz been told? Verse 11, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Why is Boaz so kind to Ruth? It's because Ruth has been so kind to Naomi. But also, actually, primarily, because he sees that Ruth has come and taken refuge under the wings of God. Ruth knew that she had nothing, was in desperate need, and seems to recognize that the one place to truly find refuge, worth giving up her homeland, everything else for, is in the Lord, the God of Israel. Dave was just asking me a little bit about sort of Grosvenor Road and sort of what happened there. I was 34 when I moved from assistant pastor into the lead pastor role of that church. At the time, I felt it. I needed to be strong and prove myself. And so I rushed from one task to another, worked all hours, felt guilty if I wasn't working every evening. If you asked me how I was, I would go, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm managing. But I wouldn't admit that actually I was completely stressed out, wrung out, not sleeping. 6 years of that, and my body had had enough. I got ill, got a virus, normal virus, and I couldn't get better. And days turned into weeks, turned into months. And I remember probably 6 or 8 weeks into this, walking down the road to the local park. 500 meters it was. And then sitting on the bench there, because that was all the strength I had, I needed to rest until I was able to walk the 500 meters back again. And I heard the birds singing. And it reminded me of Jesus' words, that God cares for the birds. He looks after them. How much more valuable are we? And I realized actually, whether I was well or sick, whatever I was trying to do, how much God cared for me. It helped me to see that my identity, my security, my refuge shouldn't be in my performance or my perception of other people's opinions of me, but in the God of extraordinary love and kindness. See, we like to think we are strong, that we don't need a refuge. But actually, we're so fragile. Have you not had that experience? The scan result comes back, or even just that email lands in your inbox and your whole world is turned upside down. We need to see our need, recognize that we are made for God, that finding refuge in God isn't a sort of sign of weakness. It's just honesty. It's just recognizing the reality that we need Him for every moment, every breath. But why? What should we expect if we do seek refuge? Ruth arrives into Bethlehem and it's harvest time, goes to the field to glean. And then it turns out it's Boaz's field, and Boaz looks after her and protects her and says she can glean there until the end of the harvest. Ruth experiences amazing kindness. If we seek refuge in God, we can expect the same. That doesn't mean He's going to give us everything we want, or that life is always easy. We still live in a world that is broken and sinful, and it's an unjust world. But it means He'll give us what is best for us. Even as I look back at my illness and struggle with ongoing underlying health conditions from it, I can still see God's kindness in all of that. He gives us what we need, provides for us, protects us, comforts us, strengthens us. But how do we know? How do we know that God is going to show this kindness? Well, we see this God even clearer than Naomi and Ruth did. We see this kindness in Jesus. You see, He came and He said, you're to love not just your neighbor, but actually also the foreigner and the outcast, even the enemy. And He did so when the needy cried out to Him, when they sought refuge in Him. Do you remember the beggar crying out, have mercy on me, have mercy on me? And the crowd saying, no, don't bother Jesus. Or the children coming to Jesus and the disciples going, no, don't bother Jesus. And Jesus goes, no, come, let them come to me. And His love was lavish. He gave not just food and healing and comfort, He held nothing back. Gave His life, punished in our place for our sin. For the times when we do life on our own, when we think we're strong, when we reject the one who gives us everything we have and seek refuge elsewhere. Boaz said to Ruth, you have taken refuge under the wings of God. And Jesus said, well, I'm not God. He described Himself as a hen longing to gather chicks under its wing. I wonder if you've ever seen a picture of that, of how a mother hen protects their chicks under her wing. My uncle and aunt lived in a farmhouse just in Donegal, sort of northwest of Ireland, many years ago. And they were actually away for the day and were told that their house was on fire. And they came back and it was too far gone. There's nothing they could do. And they just watched the house burn down in front of them. And there was just nothing left. And, they were going through the ashes and the rubble, seeing if there was anything of worth. And my aunt realized that her wedding ring had been sat on the table in a box in their bedroom. And so they went to the part of the house that would have been below where the table would be. And they searched and they searched and they could find nothing. And then they found the box. And they opened it up. And completely unharmed was her wedding ring. Now, I want you to imagine that also in the remains of that house were actually some of the animals. And one of them was a hen, a mother hen. And it was completely dead, completely charred by the fire, with its wings spread out. But when they lifted the bird, what they actually found was that under the wings were the chicks, alive and well, safe and sound. That is what Jesus did for us. as he spread his arms out on the cross. He was protecting us, giving us refuge, so that if we seek refuge in him, we know we are safe from the consequences of our sin. Yes, life will throw all sorts of stuff at us, but we know actually ultimately that he is for us in this life, and that we will be safe for eternity when we die. Well, let me take you from the field back into the kitchen, and trusting in God's kindness. I would have loved to have been there at this moment. So again, I imagine Naomi, she sat there, she's been there all day, and Ruth wanders back in. And this is what happens. Verse 17. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. Now, there's another bit of the Bible that says an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. That'll help you, won't it? Yeah, okay, good. It says 13 kilograms down the bottom. It's 22 liters. I can't even work out, what's that rucksack? Is that about? I don't know. But there is just a pile of grain that she has come back from the day with. In verse 18, she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she'd eaten enough at lunch. And here is Naomi. She sat at the table. Is God kind? And Ruth comes in and she pours this food all over the table, just so that Naomi can see the kindness of God's in the detail. And Naomi goes to Ruth, look, where, who, verse 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? But blessed is the man who took notice of you. And Ruth, I'm imagining, says a little bit more than this as she explains, well, he's old. I think the likelihood is that Boaz is significantly older than Ruth. He's a successful businessman. He's an old, nice guy, a guy called Boaz. And she says, the name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. And Naomi goes, Boaz? Verse 20, the Lord bless him. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. Is God kind? She recognizes that Boaz's kindness is showing God's kindness. Actually, that's what I think she's saying in verse 20 when she says, he has not stopped. She's talking about the Lord. God has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead. How does she know? Well, because there's barley all over the table. She came empty and it's being filled. But also, I think the cogs are whirring in her mind and she's going, a guardian redeemer? We'll think about this more after coffee and what this is about, but it's another provision in God's law that if there's an unmarried male in the family who's willing to pay the debt, buy the land, marry the widow, and act as a son, that can sort everything out. But the chances of that, it would take a miracle. And Naomi's going, is this really possible? Kindness in providing a deliverer? And so she says, well, Ruth, stay in that field. What an amazing day in this amazing harvest season. But it's still a temporary solution. There's no real resolution. Even here, Naomi and Ruth keep trusting in God's kindness. They have to do that. Let me just ask you, where are you at the moment? Are you in the kitchen questioning God's kindness? Are you actually out in the field able to see, experiencing God's kindness? Or are you back in the kitchen? You know God is kind, yet you still don't know what is round the corner. Well, whatever. What should you do? Well, let me give you 3 quick applications. Firstly, take refuge in God's kindness. If we've sought refuge in Jesus, we are safe, loved for, cared for, in the here and now, and safe for eternity. In the big, in the small, in the detail, keep going to God for refuge. If you've not sought refuge in Jesus, you're missing out on his care in this life, and you're facing judgment in the next. Secondly, recognize God's kindness in the detail of the stories of our lives. You know, it's not a coincidence. It's God. There's a lovely situation in our church where there's a couple, they had their first child. The wife had stayed off work for a while, but they needed financially for her to go back to work, and they were looking for a childminder. And they tried to find one through church and other Christian contexts because they really wanted a Christian childminder to look after their child. And, well, they couldn't find anyone. So they put an ad in I can't remember whether it was a newspaper or online or what it was, but just out to the world. And, you know, they got a few applications, and the best one looked like this girl called Lara, a Brazilian. And so Lara came and met them. They began to chat, and turned out, you're a Christian? Yeah, I am. But do you go to church? Yeah. Which church do you go to? Turns out she just started coming to their church. And that is not coincidence. That is the kindness of God. And do we see it? Do we see it in the fact we're late, but there's a parking space. My goodness. Or I'm late back from work, and my wife is actually patient with me. Kindness in the detail. Actually, we see this through people, that the means that God uses to show kindness to Ruth and Naomi is actually Boaz. It's another person, and so often that is how God works. And so maybe here's a question for you over coffee. Where have you seen God's kindness in the detail of your life over the last week or month? Or in what people have done for you? And where we can see that, we should be amazed, not entitled. Recognize God's kindness in the detail and in the deliverer. We're not promised every comfort now. The ultimate person and place where we find protection and safety and refuge and rest is in Jesus Christ, and the full experience of that in eternity. Recognize God's kindness. And thirdly, reflect God's kindness. Boaz is actually an imperfect picture of God, a picture of what God is like in that lavish love that just goes beyond what is required. And if we're followers of Jesus, we should show lavish love wherever we go for the needy, the lonely, the foreigner, the grieving person, the family with neurodiverse children, the friend that nobody else seems to want to hang out with, the non-Christian who just seems so lost and so broken. Do we show them love like Boaz, like Jesus? Reflect God's kindness. Because if we know Jesus, we've found the true refuge. And so should be able to say with Ruth, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you would notice me, O God? Or say with Naomi, the Lord has not stopped showing kindness to both the living and the dead. Let me pray. Almighty God, as we pause and cry out to you now, you know what is going on in our world. You know, if we're in the kitchen just questioning, are you really who you claim to be? Are you a God who is slow to anger and rich in love and compassionate? Or maybe we're experiencing your kindness. Or maybe we're utterly convinced but afraid of what lies around the corner. We ask that you would help us to see again your lavish love in the Lord Jesus for us, and even in the details of your providential care in everyday life. Lift our eyes that we might see these things, give you the glory, and reflect back the kindness that we've experienced as we show kindness to others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.